Good afternoon and welcome to the continuation of the Public Service Commission of South Carolina's Wednesday business meeting. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Caston. Chairman Williams, are you on the line telephonically?
I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, and Vice Chair Belser. And this afternoon, I believe we are hearing from another interviewee for consultant in our avoided cost dockets. We have Power Advisory LLC, Mr. Dalton and Miss Askamitis, is that correct? Mr. Askamitis.
Oxamitis, yes, thank you.
Thank you. I saw the K and thought female. I apologize, sir. Welcome and thank y'all for being present with us today and to give us some information. We appreciate your submittal. If this format will suit you, what if you take about 5 to 10 minutes and give us an overview of your submittal, your RFP. If you want to delve into any of the questions that were sent to you with regard that the commission had propounded, feel free to do that. And if whatever you don't cover, we'll follow up with questions. Mr. Dalton, are you going to start?
Yes, I will start. Good afternoon. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to present our qualifications and to respond to your questions. Yes, as indicated, my name is John Dalton. I would be serving as the project manager for this case. I am the president of Power Advisory. The role that I would be serving, or that I've been proposed to serve in this avoided cost proceeding, is a similar role as I served in the 2019 proceeding when Power Advisory was engaged by the Commission to review the avoided cost filings of Dominion Energy South Carolina, Duke Energy Progress, and Duke Energy Carolinas. As I've included my proposal in the proposal, my resume, and I think as outlined there, demonstrates extensive experience with review of avoided costs. Currently, right now, I am advising the state of New Hampshire with the development of avoided costs for solar energy facilities and smaller hydroelectric facilities. And in the last several years, I advised the state of Rhode Island with respect to avoided costs that were developed for a large 400 megawatt procurement that they were conducting, and supported that in formal testimony that was filed with Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission. Also, a major practice area of mine is with respect to electricity price forecasting. Also, as you'll hear, is an area of significant capability for Chris. I think this is relevant because essentially the models that are used to develop avoided costs and to estimate avoided costs are virtually the same models that are used to forecast electricity prices. And this is a major practice area of mine. I'll delve into some of our other relevant experience when we get into some of the questions that the commission and the parties have posed. To talk a little bit in terms of our proposal, and then I'll turn it over to Chris to introduce himself. Based on our past experience, we have a good understanding in terms of the task at hand and what the commission would be charging us to do. One of the things that we're well aware of is the very aggressive schedule that would be required by this project. And our project structure that we've outlined is geared to address that aggressive schedule. So the structure that we have at the highest level is I'll be serving as the project manager, and then we have 2 lead consultants, Chris being one and Brady Yawk being the other. And Chris would be responsible for reviewing the filing for Dominion Energy South Carolina, and Brady would be responsible for reviewing the filing for the Duke Energy companies. And one thing that we see is that the schedule calls for the hearings for the Duke Energy avoided cost hearings to begin on August 2nd. So we would obviously, if engaged to do this work, we need to roll up our sleeves and get to work and be prepared to monitor that proceeding, as well as assist the commission with its review, and if as desired, to help with posing questions to the various witnesses in this Duke hearing. I think the other thing, that is probably worth talking about is the process that we're going to be using to review the avoided costs. Similar process as we used last time. It's very focused in terms of reviewing the filing that the companies have submitted, including the direct testimony, their response to data requests and various interrogatories, as well as looking at the testimony, direct and serve rebuttal of the various parties to this proceeding. One of the challenges that we understand is that based on the schedule, we expect that there's probably going to be limited, if any, possibly no opportunity for us to ask supplemental data requests. That's something that, we can live with if we have to. But it's, so I feel like we have a good understanding in terms of the specific schedule challenges. We've outlined a team that is proposing to take a very targeted approach and, willing to work with the commission in terms of coming up with a schedule that will meet their needs based on when you're hoping to issue a decision in this proceeding. Chris, over to you for an introduction, and obviously anything else, any other comments you propose to make with respect to to our proposal and you think our relevant experience.
Okay, thanks, John, and thank you to the commission for having us here today. So I'll just maybe highlight a few things in my personal experience and don't have a whole bunch to add relative to what John mentioned.
Excuse me just a second. This is Vice Chair Belser. May I ask you to state and spell your name? We do have a court reporter that is taking down this proceeding, so just so she's clear on the name, please.
No, okay, for sure. My apologies. So it's Chris with a K, K-R-I-S, Oxomitis, A-K-S-O-M-I-T-I-S.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, as I was noting, my experience is I have roughly 20 years of experience in electricity markets, and I think the relevant experience as compared to this hearing or potential hearing is that I've been doing electricity market forecasting and avoided cost assessments and evaluations of assets for roughly that full 20 years. And it's largely the same skill set as required in order to evaluate the avoided cost filing. So as John noted, I was part of the team that did this work in 2019. And, so I think that gives us a leg up in terms of hitting the ground running and understanding all the key issues in that market. And then layering on top of that, our expertise in looking at a wide range of markets across North America from a range of perspectives, both as generation investors, as utilities, as potential load customers. So I think we bring, pretty diverse skill sets, and happy to take any specific questions, but I think that's the key things that I'd like to add.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Power Advisories?
Madam Vice Chair.
Commissioner Powers.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I don't know which one's going to answer these questions. I direct them at both of you. We have sent to you a series of questions we're interested in. I'm going to try and run through them as fast as I can and give you as much opportunity to answer as you need. I heard about your background. These questions are specific to what we're looking at. Have you ever appeared before the Public Service Commission of South Carolina as a consultant or representative for any party? If so, what party, where, and what docket that was in?
Yes, we have. That was, but it was for the commission in the previous avoided cost proceeding, and the docket numbers were, I believe, 2019-185E for Duke Energy Carolinas, 2019-186E for Duke Energy Progress, and 29-184E for Dominion Energy South Carolina. We haven't worked with any other parties in this proceeding in front of the Public Service Commission.
All right, so you have represented both Duke and Dominion in the earlier hearings.
But we were serving in the same role as in this case.
Oh, okay.
As asked to here, we were basically the commission's independent expert reviewing the avoided cost filings of Dominion and Duke.
Thank you. Have you ever been employed or retained as a consultant for Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress, or Dominion Energy, or any of their affiliates?
No,
Okay.
we have not.
Have you or your employees, associates, contractors, or partner ever been retained to represent investor-owned public utilities in South Carolina of any type?
No, we have not.
All right. Do you or members of your immediate family, partners, or associates own any stock in Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress, or Dominion Energy?
We do not own any separate shares. The only caveat I would offer is a number of individuals in the firm own interest in mutual funds, and the mutual funds themselves might have some interest with respect to Dominion or Duke. It's nothing that anyone in the firm has any specific knowledge of, but as an investor, for example, I own an index fund, and to the degree that any of these companies are part of that index fund, then I would indirectly own a share in them. But I don't believe that represents a conflict.
Do you think that possibility could affect your ability to do what's asked in this case?
No, I don't. It would not affect my our independence. I think one point that is important to make is that as a consultant, one of the things, our bread and butter is essentially our independence.
Do you have any reason to believe you couldn't serve as a fair, impartial, independent consultant for any of these dockets?
No, none whatsoever.
Do you have any ongoing business dealings with the parties in these dockets?
No.
Are you currently in any negotiations to represent any of the parties before any other public service commission or public utilities commission?
No.
Do you hold any licenses, degrees, designations, credentials that qualify you as an expert in this field of electric utility matters? And if so, what are these credentials? Where'd you get them and when?
So I think the relevant credentials that the team would bring would be, one of our team members is a professional engineer. And as a professional engineer, I think that, he's effectively an electrical engineer, so he has a strong understanding of transmission networks. Chris has a master's in economics. We have another staff member that has a master's in economics. I have a master's in business administration. I think all those disciplines are very helpful when evaluating an avoided cost filing, given the financial analysis that has to underpin a 20-year forecast of avoided costs. And this is something we particularly see with respect to avoided capacity costs, where there's a need to essentially convert the capital costs of a project in terms of total dollars into essentially an annual charge. So that's probably the most relevant experience or most relevant academic and professional capability that this team brings to bear.
Are you or any member of your team a member of any utilities-related trade groups or organizations?
Yes, the one trade group an organization that we're a member of that I think would be relevant is the Electricity Distributors Association. This is essentially a consortium of electricity distributors. They have no, operations or interest in South Carolina, but it's essentially a trade organization that includes electric utilities.
Okay. There are a list of parties involved, both as interveners and actual parties to these cases. in this dockets, and we are going to provide those to you today. It's required that a conflicts check letter be provided back to us by end of day on Friday the 23rd. Can you provide a final written proof of conflicts checks from your firm if we provide the information?
Most certainly, we can certainly do that within that time frame.
Okay. If you're hired as a consultant, are you willing to abstain from any unauthorized ex parte contact with the parties in this docket?
Most definitely.
Are you aware of any reasons that you or your firm should not serve as an independent expert in these dockets?
None whatsoever.
I think you mentioned in your opening that you realize it's a tight, aggressive schedule. What is your schedule for project completion?
I guess I don't, our proposed approach to that would be to, in the past proceeding, there's essentially a staff liaison that we had. So what I'm proposing here is that we have discussions with that staff liaison to understand, what the commission's desired date for issuing a decision, and then to work back in terms of if you need to issue a decision on that date, then, how many weeks would you need to review our various independent reports? And to, then assess, okay, if a report has to be issued on that date, what is it going to take to draft it? Recognizing that, when the hearings are going to occur and any other, subsequent opportunities for gathering additional data. So I guess my feeling is I don't have a definitive answer, but I feel like based on our past experience, based on the project structure that we're offering, we're as well positioned as anyone to kind of live within the schedule constraints that the commission may have, which at this point I can't fully appreciate.
Are you able to give some estimate of hours that would take per docket and estimated total hours you think you would expend?
I do. It's a very rough estimate, not necessarily understanding, all of the proceeding. And, what I've done is essentially broken it down in terms of what it would take to review the various filings, the avoided cost filings, direct testimony, the response to data requests, the parties' direct testimony, serve rebuttal testimony, as well as monitoring the hearing, and then report drafting. And I think that, our estimate there is anywhere, for these companies from anywhere to kind of 100 to 200 hours. I say for these companies, it's my expectation that for the Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, that there's, given that the methods are essentially the same, the facts are different, given that they are different systems. There's going to be significant economies. We'd expect that there would be one independent report, which would review the Duke company. So it'd probably be closer to, that 200-hour estimate. And I think as well for the Duke Energy companies, there might be some additional savings that could be realized based on, a high-level review of the issues that I've performed to date.
Relative to the requirements of Act 62 and relative to avoided costs, what information does this commission need, in your opinion, to receive from your firm?
So, we do have some understanding in terms of Act 62 based on our last work with the commission. And, the language that I turn to in terms of Act 62, which essentially, indicates that, that the commission to assess the avoided costs, needs to reflect, and this is specific language from Act 62, a careful balancing of interests. And then it goes on to say, such that any decision by the commission shall be just, reasonable to the ratepayers of the electric utility in the public interest, consistent with PURPA and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's implementing regulations and orders, and non-discriminating to small power producers, and strive to reduce the risk placed on using and consuming public. That is what we basically view as our charter. And we think that any report that we provide to the commission, really needs to kind of use that criteria and assess the filing, applying that criteria.
Do you or your firm contribute to any political action committees, candidates, or political parties?
No, we do not.
Is anyone who currently works for your organization who worked for a public utility or solar company in the past?
No,
Is anyone who worked for your organization in the past who currently works for a public utility or solar company?
so we have one staff member who worked for a utility in the past, Travis Lesney, who's the professional engineer who I identified. He no longer, he's an employee of ours and has no association with that electric utility.
Is anyone associated with your organization who has any affiliation with a public utility or solar company?
We have one individual who formerly worked for a solar company, Sarah Simmons. She is an employee of ours now and has worked with us for 5 years and has no current affiliation with any solar company. And we have no other employees that have any affiliations currently with solar companies.
Have you ever drafted purchase power agreements? If so, when, and explain whatever apparent experience you have with what the energy source was that was involved.
Yeah, we have, as a firm, and I personally have extensive experience with respect to drafting power purchase agreements. These power purchase agreements have, covered the full range of energy resources, including natural gas resources, solar resources, and wind resources. This work really kind of spans, my professional career has been in, a wide range of different jurisdictions across North America. It includes, Massachusetts. It includes, various jurisdictions in Canada, other markets in terms of, in the U.S. as well. So I think that's one area where we as a firm have, extensive experience and extensive knowledge.
With that type of experience, can you explain how something like wind-focused avoided costs or other energy sources not commonly found in South Carolina may be relevant to South Carolina?
Sure. I think that the issue is that, for a wind resource with respect to avoided cost estimates, you clearly need to reflect the operating profile of the resource when determining what are the avoided costs of that resource. Or the underlying methodology that one would use to calculate the avoided costs, that is not going to vary from technology to technology. It'll basically be the same methodology. And, we have extensive experience for kind of the full range of technologies, assessing avoided costs. This same is true with respect to drafting power purchase agreements. The power purchase agreements for a wind resource are very similar to a solar resource. You need to reflect that they are variable output resources. And so there's going to be specific provisions in there that reflect that fact.
Have you ever drafted commitment to sell forms? If you have, what experience do you have with that?
I have not. However, we offered opinions with respect to the commitment to sell forms that were filed by Duke and Dominion in the 2019 proceeding. So that's the most relevant experience that I bring to bear. And I think it is in fact relevant.
If you could describe your experience with avoided costs and avoided cost methodologies with specific information such as time frame and for what purpose, including the state where this occurred, and your opinion of this relevance to South Carolina.
Certainly, maybe the first place to start would be the work that we did in 2019, which I think is, for the commission is, directly relevant. It was the same universal companies. We're not going to prejudge the filings based on our past work, but I think it does, inform our understanding in terms of the likely methodologies that are being used. I'd mentioned in my introduction current work that I am doing for the state of New Hampshire with the development of avoided cost estimates for solar energy facilities there I'm basically serving as a technical expert and partnering with another consulting firm and essentially developing avoided cost estimates that will be used by the state, similar to South Carolina will be using its avoided cost estimates to determine purchase prices for solar energy projects. I'd mentioned some work I'd done with Rhode Island, looking at a 400 megawatt procurement initiative where I reviewed the model, similar to we'd be reviewing the models for Duke and Dominion, and reviewed the underlying assumptions and offered opinion in terms of the reasonableness of the modeling framework, as well as the assumptions, and then submitted testimony as part of kind of a broader filing on our conclusions regarding the reasonableness of the purchase.
Do you have experience? Do you have experience drafting data requests or providing discovery?
Extensive experience. I mean, as indicated, I've testified in 25 different, over 25 different proceedings. And as part of that, typically one of the tasks is, drafting data requests, responding to discovery. So that's an area where, and Chris similarly has testified. So all of the senior staff that we're bringing to bear on this project have that experience.
The next question I was going to ask is about the schedule and who would be doing what work, but I think you answered that in your introduction as to how your team would work and who would be responsible for which cases, which dockets. So I'm going to move on. The selected consultant, if it's your company, will need to read, listen to testimony at the same time of doing your analysis. Talk about your team's experience in similar situations with a compressed schedule and how you will undertake this work.
Yeah, so this is, the experience that we had in 2019 really, informed me in terms of how I thought was what I thought was the best approach for providing the services that you've requested. So, we've identified that Brady Yawk is going to be the individual who's going to be the consulting lead reviewing Duke Energy's avoided cost filing. Their hearing, my understanding, begins on August 2nd. So as soon as we get authority to begin work, Brady will be reviewing the avoided cost filing, reviewing the direct testimony, outlining issues. I'll be helping him with that. And I think that we would, effectively go into that proceeding with some thoughts in terms of some questions that we would propose to ask to the companies as well as to the parties in the proceeding. And in the course of monitoring the proceeding, it's likely that additional questions would come up. And to the degree possible, we'd work with, the commission and appropriate liaison to make sure that those questions were posed to the appropriate witnesses. So this is definitely an area where we have experience. I think the critical thing is that one needs sufficient time to really be able to dive into the documents to understand the methodology. I think our past experience, reviewing the avoided cost filings for both companies help us to do that.
With your experience, as far as listening to testimony, you see any problem absorbing new information and identifying any data requests for additional information?
No, I think that's something that we did in 2019, and it's our expectation we would need to do it here. So it's going to be very important that we're, monitoring those hearings as we get an understanding of an issue or as a question comes up, that we're able to, share that so that question can be asked and the record can be developed.
Okay. Also, as far as not just listen to testimony, you'll be able to provide testimony and address the critical and relevant data that is presented to arrive at a fair avoided cost.
Yes, if that's called for, and that's part of our mandate, then that is something we can do. As I've indicated, all of the three senior staff members have testified before, and we would be prepared to do so.
Are you able and prepared to provide a clear written report regarding recommendations for fair avoided costs, which would be easily understood by commissioners and staff?
Yes, is certainly something we can do. I guess I would point you to our 2019 reports. And I think that that's, a fair measure of the quality of our work. If you're happy with those reports, then I think you'll be happy with the reports that we would produce in this proceeding. If you're not happy with those reports, then, conceivably you should engage another consulting firm.
Okay.
But I think that those are a fair testament to the quality of work that we can provide.
Having laid out who would be responsible for what and how your team would undertake this work, what are the benefits of awarding all these contracts to just one firm or to your firm?
So I think the benefits are two. One, I think there'll probably be some efficiencies in terms of reviewing both. So that will be reflected in terms of lower, total cost, I would expect. I think another potential benefit is there's probably going to be some cross-fertilization of ideas in terms of reviewing one company's filing. The team will be able to kind of share ideas in terms of, we've identified this issue. Do you see that as an issue in terms of the other company's filing? So I see those as the two, primary benefits.
Do you see benefits in awarding only one contract to your firm?
I think the benefit there would be if you were concerned with the ability of our firm to work within the schedule that you identified, then obviously having responsibility for just reviewing one company's avoidance cost filing will be less work and should reduce any burdens and challenges in terms of meeting the schedules that you're going to be asking for.
With your experience, do you think you would be able to meet the schedules as far as responding to discovery?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, the challenge is I don't know what that schedule is, but we as consultants, work evenings and weekends when required to meet schedules. But without specifically knowing that schedule, it's hard for me to kind of offer a blanket response. But I think that it's our expectations based on the team structure that we've identified, we'll be in a position to do that.
And if necessary, you'd be available to be deposed, cross-examined, and testify?
Yes, we would. Yes. And that's something that, I've been deposed in the past, and I've indicated that the entire team has testified, the entire senior team has testified in other proceedings.
As a consultant, do you have the ability to replicate the modeling used by the utilities in-house?
Yeah, I guess I'd say we have the ability. We've elected to not do that. We're concerned that the time that would be required to do that doesn't fit within the anticipated schedule for this project. I've done that in the past for other projects, and that is a very resource-intensive process. And it was a resource-intensive process when we had the full cooperation of the party whose avoided costs that we were reviewing and whose analysis that we were reviewing. I think at the end of the day, my final concern with that approach is that I would be concerned with the admissibility of any avoided cost estimate that was developed if there wasn't, sufficient opportunity for cross-examination, interrogatories, and my concern would be that that would potentially significantly delay any proceeding.
Is that something that you may outsource to another entity? And if you did, would you be able to ensure that that person or entity would not have any conflicts in these dockets?
We're not proposing to outsource it. We're suggesting that trying to replicate the analysis is not the best approach, that a more appropriate approach would be to provide independent review of the modeling framework. We understand the models that are used and to apply appropriate scrutiny to the model assumptions. And based on a review of the model framework and a review of the assumptions, we can offer an opinion in terms of the reasonableness of the avoided cost estimates.
If you didn't do that and we're requiring the utility to rerun the modeling they use, providing inputs Can you ensure the modeling was done correctly if you provided the inputs?
We could, if we have sufficient opportunity to thoroughly review the modeling results and the
Do you
input
have-
assumptions.
Do you have the ability to
Yes,
review
yeah.
what the utility has done with respect to methodology and modeling and render an opinion if their work was performed correctly?
Yes, we do. That's basically a cornerstone of our approach.
Okay.
That's how we're proposing to do, is provide this independent review.
So
Something we did in the 2019 proceeding and something we're proposing to do here.
do you have the ability to replicate the modeling performed by the utility to review for accuracy and correctness?
We do, but we're not proposing to do that, given the complexities that I identified earlier.
Do you feel you have the ability to render an opinion as to whether the inputs used by the utility are appropriate or correct in these dockets?
Most definitely, yes.
Okay. Madam Chair, that'd be all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Powers. Commissioners, any other questions?
Vice Chair Belcher.
Commissioner Caston?
I want to make sure I've heard everything correctly. In response to Commissioner Powers' questions on the modeling, saying you have the in-house or capability to run models, but for this particular proposal, you would be evaluating the models of the utilities themselves for, I guess, accuracy or the assumptions they used. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, I mean, the models we have are different models, but they employ similar methods. So we have the capability. If there was greater time available and greater resources, it's something we could do. Based on our understanding of the project schedule, we've made a decision that that's not the best path to work within the schedule that you have and to provide a report that's going to be the most defensible.
Okay. So, I understand it, I guess the accuracy or value of avoided cost analysis is purely dependent on the input. And it's my understanding that looking at hourly demands and daily weather conditions, I guess the historical daily weather conditions of the service area is very important. Is that accurate? Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, it is. Chris, is there anything you propose to add here?
I think you've captured the key is to do a good job. Ultimately, you need a lot of data from the utility about hourly conditions, about all the issues on their system, and in order to do that, that takes a lot of time. And you can get a good sense for how good of a job a utility has done in assessing all of those issues and accurately capturing them, much more time effectively than starting from scratch and building that model up from the ground up. So given the time constraints, it's probably more reasonable to be able to assess something that's done as opposed to start from scratch.
So in other words, evaluate the inputs that the utility used as far as, and verify their daily demands that they used and the weather information that they used or did not use. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I think basically I'm saying you can evaluate their assumptions, their methodologies, the consistency of the output with reasonable expectations from a lot of other work that we've done. Does it all tie together in a logical way? Are there things that stick out as difficult to explain given the inputs, methodology, and outputs?
what their model is trying to do is essentially to represent their electricity system. Essentially, a model is to represent how the system operates. So as part of that, you need to make sure that you've got the entire system specified properly. You have the generating units, in there with all of their operating constraints reflected. You need appropriate fuel price forecasts in them. We've talked about, electricity demand. That's important to reflect. You also need to reflect whether there are any, system constraints in terms of transmission. So there's kind of a wide range of assumptions that need to go into the model, and one needs to really kind of be able to independently assess those.
So from that information, I guess the model and the assumptions used that your firm would evaluate, do you look at, I guess they come up with one avoided cost number, say, rather than perhaps a difference between a qualified facility that provides dispatchable energy versus one with variable energy. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think in the past, what we've seen is typically that there will be an estimate of the hourly avoided costs, and it's important to kind of get to that level of detail and to be able to follow that, and that's why one of the questions that the commission poses and asks us to address is essentially the reviewability of the modeling framework that the companies use, and that's a very important question. So, and you're right. It's our experience that the avoided costs for variable output resource such as solar is going to be very different for a resource that's dispatchable or one that potentially has a very different operating profile.
All right, one final question. Did I understand you to say that performing all three of the utility analyses, you estimated 100 to 200 hours of man hour? Or was that per?
That was more per. So it's 100 to 200 for probably Dominion, and then 100 to 200 for both Duke companies. So we're not talking about 400. It's not 200 to 400 for both Duke companies, but it's probably 100 to 200 for both Duke companies. And these are rough estimates. I don't fully understand. My budget estimate didn't account for the fact if we're going to be deposed, if we're going to have to testify, if we're going to have to respond to data requests. My estimate was based on the process that was used in 2019, where we provided an independent review of the report, assisted with drafting data requests, and monitored the hearings, and then drafted our report. If we're going to also have to testify, then there will be very likely some additional expense associated with that effort.
Okay. So if I'm understanding that correctly, and I can't recall, I don't have your proposal in front of me. I can't remember if they have these specific tasks and details of those tasks. But it sounds like, based on what you just said, your basic understanding was probably in the 300 to 400 hour range total for all three. Is that correct or reasonable?
Yes, it is, with the caveat that I offered regarding, the level of support that's required. If we're going to have to testify, we would need to understand what is that. If we're going to be deposed as well as testify, what's the process going to be for any data requests? So all that, it's a best estimate. My estimate, as I said, is more predicated on the experience that we had in the 2019 proceeding, where we didn't have to testify. So there will be some additional efforts. But your ballpark, your estimate that you cited is, yes, consistent with what I would view based on how things went in 2019.
And if I understood you correctly also, that your firm could manage or complete all three utilities in compliance with the request for proposals in a compressed time frame of 12 weeks or less.
Was that 12 weeks or less?
Yes.
I think we can do that. Yes, I did. I hadn't heard 12 weeks, but I think that 12 weeks is, Chris?
Yeah, based on my understanding from last time and kind of the current proposal, as I understand it, 12 weeks is a reasonable time frame for sure.
The issue becomes, it becomes less reasonable to the degree that you're going to have to layer in testimony there. That's one thing that worries me, because then that means we're going to have to move up the date when we have to issue our report, which, or whatever we're going to provide, which will be subject to the cross-examination. So 12 weeks could be, a challenge if we have to testify as well. But I think it's something that, at the end of the day, we probably can figure out a way to do.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Dalton. And
Thank you.
Chris, thank you.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin, I had seen Commissioner Thomas at the same time as
All right.
Commissioner Caston, so I'll come back to you next, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Yes, ma'am.
Thomas?
Thank you. Mr. Dalton, so we have interviewed 4 potential candidates here, and was wondering what you would think if we were to decide to hire 2 to work together on this project or these projects. Is that something that you could do? Is that something that you've ever done? What would you see as the pluses and minuses of that?
I guess it would depend in terms of how clearly the responsibilities are delineated. One possibility would be to say, this is so important that we want, both firms to review each of the filings and to independently kind of develop their estimates. I think that one other possibility would be to, and it was the question that was posed earlier, to hire 2 firms and to have one firm review Dominion and the other firm review Duke Energy, and to essentially provide for collaboration between those reviews. So I think that that's something that's possible. I think the challenge becomes egos. We frankly don't have we don't have oversized egos, but obviously. This is going to be, based on the schedule that we're talking about here, it's going to be a compressed time frame. And one thing that I would be concerned with is if we're relying on someone else, we need to make sure that they're going to be able to deliver on what their respective responsibilities are. Because for 12 weeks for finishing a project like this, we wouldn't be in a position to kind of step in and redo any work that another firm was being asked to do.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I know there's been some discussion due to the compressed time frame that we would simply follow the procedure that we used in 2019 when our expert was not required to testify, was not subject to data requests by the parties. And I thought maybe I was mistaken, but it's my understanding we were not going to require our expert to testify rather than just simply render a report. Am I correct?
Commissioner, we have a regulation that was promulgated. It's still under review, but I think that my understanding was that we were going to try to follow that process that is set forth in that regulation that's under review, and that is probably more potential that the consultant would have to respond to discovery and testify.
Well, I think we need to set this on the agenda for our next business meeting because I'm very concerned about that. We've already heard several of our candidates speak to the compressed time frame, and my concern is that could lengthen the hearing substantially, and it could delay the hearing because if parties are required to submit data requests to our expert, they have to have time to respond. They may need additional information. And since we're talking about a draft regulation, I would favor following the procedure that we followed in 2019, which was fairly straightforward and simple. That's just my personal preference. But back to the questions, we'll deal with that later in a later discussion. I know other commissioners may have other thoughts about that.
Commissioner Irvin,
Yes.
Ms. Boyd, our executive director, is in the hearing room, and she can
Yes.
certainly make a note that we will put something on the next agenda to discuss.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very
sir.
much. I'm wondering, I went back and read the report that you did in 2019, and it was a time frame about 12 weeks to accomplish that task, or do you recall?
I believe we're engaged in late August, and the report was issued in November. So,
Okay.
right, so that would be September, October. So yeah, that
And that took, so it took almost, what, did it take 3 months from start to finish? From your engagement letter to the final report?
I think it was a little less than that.
A little less, maybe 2.5 months?
Yeah.
And just to assist the commission in our dilemma with the very short time frame that we're working with, had you had to answer data requests from the other parties and then be deposed and then testify, is it fair to say that could lengthen the proceeding by a matter of 2, 3, 4 weeks or more?
Yeah, I think 4 weeks is a reasonable estimate.
4 weeks,
Right.
an additional month, could add on an additional month. So we're talking about, rather than getting it done in 2.5 months, you're looking at 3.5 months or more. Is that fair to say?
That sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, we would issue a report. You need to give them some time to review it, to propound data requests for us to respond, and then for the hearing. So conceivably, that's 4+, but.
And it could take longer depending on the data requests and so forth. If you had to revise your report, for example, that could extend the period, right? Or supplement your report.
It would. I'm hoping that we wouldn't have to do that, but.
Right. Okay. And it would certainly drive up the cost of the project, whether it's you or somebody else. You're doing it on an hourly basis, so it would certainly add to the cost of hiring an expert, correct?
It would, yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your appearance today. One final question. Since you went through this process in South Carolina in 2019, a little more than 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, do you think that gives you, as you said earlier, a leg up because you kind of know the players, you know the parties, you know the companies. So you come in with already kind of a working understanding of the process and the responsibilities and the expectations.
I mean, I think it does. I think it is what I would characterize as a source of competitive advantage. I think it's important to note though that, we have to review what's filed, based on what's filed. But I think that, based on the team's cumulative experience, we're well positioned to kind of hit the ground running. And I think that for an aggressive schedule like this, I see that as a benefit. So I think that, that should hopefully help in terms of the quality of the work product as well as timely delivery.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your being with us today. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Commissioners, any further questions for Mr. Dalton? Hearing none, Mr. Dalton, I'd like to thank you and Mr. Axamatis for being present today, for your presentations, your patience with us. We appreciate your submittal and the details that you've provided. And as stated earlier, there will be an email going out to y'all this afternoon asking for the final conflicts check letter. There will be a listing of all the parties in these dockets to include any potential conflicts or any conflicts with any of the parties, not just the utilities involved. But thank you for your work thus far in making the submittal, and we will certainly be in touch after that. Any further questions for us at the moment?
No, obviously I appreciate the opportunity to kind of review our experience, to answer your questions. It's important work. It's going to be a challenging project, but I think we're up to the challenge. I guess one thing I will note is we got a request today, I think, as did probably all of the parties you interviewed for letters of reference. I have issued those. 2 of the 3 requests, I got responses back indicating that people were out of the office. So I will endeavor to do the best in terms of getting those letters of reference submitted to you. But it's a challenging time of year with people's schedules. But
Okay. Thank you.
Just a word of caution there. Thank you.
Appreciate that explanation. Thank you very much. With that, we will close this meeting, and we'll let y'all know of our decision as soon as we can. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.